It was a night like any other at the restaurant. The tables were full, the buzz of conversations filled the air, and she moved quickly between the customers, balancing trays and exchanging professional smiles. But there was something different about that night, something the waitress, a quiet and observant woman, couldn't ignore. Sitting at the corner table, where he always preferred to be, was the millionaire. He had been coming to the restaurant for months, always discreet, as if he were just another customer, though everyone knew who he was. She had never exchanged more than brief and polite words with him, just enough to take his orders. But that night, while cleaning a nearby table, she overheard something that made her pause. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as he spoke to a man sitting across from him. He was talking about an important meeting, something happening the next day, something big. However, there was hesitation in his voice, a detail that seemed to trouble the millionaire, though he brushed it off. The words were vague, but the waitress's intuition screamed at her. Something was wrong. She didn't know exactly what, but she felt an unease she couldn't shake. Her eyes lingered on the millionaire longer than usual. She wrestled internally. Should she warn him? It wasn't her business. He might laugh at her, or worse, think she was seeking attention. And yet, the unease grew, gnawing at her with each passing second. Taking a deep breath, she approached his table. "Excuse me, sir." The millionaire looked up at the waitress, confusion and skepticism written across his face. The conversation at his table had been abruptly interrupted, and he was about to object to the intrusion. After all, he was a businessman, accustomed to being treated with respect and formality. However, the intensity in her eyes, a mix of seriousness and concern, made him pause. "Sorry to interrupt, sir," she continued, her tone firm but gentle. "I overheard your conversation. It sounds like you have an important meeting tomorrow, and I just feel like something might not be right. Just think about it." He frowned, doubt clouding his mind like a gathering storm. Why would a waitress, a seemingly ordinary woman, be so concerned with his business? She was just an employee at a restaurant, and her life in many ways seemed so far removed from his. But there was something genuine in her expression, a sincerity he didn't often see in the people around him. For a moment, the millionaire sat in silence, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. Should he take her warning seriously? In his world, where money and power shaped every interaction, listening to the voice of a simple waitress seemed at first glance like a mistake. And yet his curiosity grew. What was it about this upcoming meeting that made him feel so unsettled? He looked at the woman again, searching for any sign of insincerity, but all he found was genuine concern. The battle between his rational mind and a sudden urge to trust her intuition created a dilemma. This wasn't just about business anymore. There was something deeply human about her offer of help that he couldn't ignore. Back at his office, the millionaire was surrounded by his trusted advisors, men and women whose expertise was unquestionable. He recounted the encounter with the waitress casually, almost as if he didn't expect much reaction. But as he finished the story, the silence was broken by a quiet laugh followed by murmurs of disbelief. "A waitress?" one of the advisors repeated, incredulous. "With all due respect, sir, you're letting the words of someone without experience influence a business decision?" Others nodded in agreement. An older advisor, a man who had stood by his side during pivotal moments, stepped forward with a cautious expression. "We can't allow superstitions or unfounded concerns to cloud our judgment, especially now. This meeting is crucial, sir. Let instinct and logic guide us." His advisor's words carried weight. They spoke with the confidence of those who had faced countless situations and triumphed in them all. The truth was, the millionaire's pride was also at stake. How could he justify putting trust in the words of a stranger, someone who had no understanding of the business at hand? The voices around him, full of rationality and thinly veiled disdain, pushed him toward the logical conclusion: proceed with his plans, ignore the warning. And yet, deep in his mind, something was unsettling, a small doubt he couldn't silence. Daniel, the millionaire, sat in his luxurious office holding the phone with his advisor's number already dialed. The conversation with the waitress, Laura, echoed in his mind. She seemed so determined, so genuine, But what could a waitress possibly know about the risks of a multi-million-dollar deal? The pressure on his shoulders was overwhelming. Canceling such an important meeting could be seen as a sign of weakness, and his business partners would undoubtedly judge him for it. Daniel stood up, walking over to the large glass window that offered a breathtaking view of the city. He could see the streetlights, people coming and going, each one following their own path. Maybe that was it. Everyone following their own way, blindly trusting their decisions without considering warnings that came from unexpected places. With a trembling hand, he finally made his decision. He hung up the phone, canceling the meeting that could have meant millions in profit. As crazy as it seemed, something inside him screamed that Laura was right, even though he couldn't explain why. He sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the choice he had made. Tension built up inside him. Daniel kept questioning himself. What if I'm making a mistake? What if her warning was just a misunderstanding? But for the first time in a long time, he chose to trust his intuition. It was a huge risk, but Laura's calm and confident voice kept replaying in his mind, pushing him toward this decision. Stepping away from the window, he sat back at his desk, waiting for the consequences, unsure of what was to come next. The next morning, Daniel woke up to the sound of his phone vibrating insistently on the nightstand. With a heavy head, he glanced at the screen. Several familiar names. His advisors, business partners, even journalists. Something had happened. As he made his way down to breakfast, he felt a growing sense of unease. Turning on the news, everything became clear. The meeting he had canceled had been a total disaster. What seemed like a golden opportunity had actually been a carefully laid trap by a rival company. The contract he would have signed was filled with hidden clauses that would have practically guaranteed the downfall of his business. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. If he had attended, his signature would have been a fatal blow to his company. The media was in a frenzy, covering the collapse of the rival group, which had finally been exposed. His advisors, the very ones who had encouraged him to ignore the warning, were now silent, ashamed, sending messages of apology. They knew they had failed to protect what he had built. With a slight tremble in his hands, Daniel turned off the TV. The sense of relief and gratitude was overwhelming. Laura's words, the waitress he had nearly ignored, echoed in his mind more powerfully than ever. She had saved not only his company but also his reputation and everything he had worked for over the years. What else could the simple intuition of a stranger see that he, with all his wealth and power, had missed? A new sense of admiration and respect grew within him. Daniel spent the rest of the day lost in thought. Sitting in his living room, surrounded by the luxury and security of his mansion, he felt vulnerable in a way he had never experienced before. Everything he owned, his fortune, his empire, his reputation, had been on the brink of collapse, and he hadn't even known. His mind wandered back to Laura, the waitress. Why had she, a simple woman with no connection to the business world, been able to see what he, with all his resources, couldn't? He had always believed that power and money gave him absolute control, but here was proof that sometimes what's essential can't be bought. Daniel reflected on how much he blindly trusted his advisors and the experts around him. Their words, which once sounded wise, now echoed like distant whispers of pride and convenience. They had been comfortable in their certainty, while he, the man at the center of it all, had almost fallen into a fatal trap. How had he come so close to losing everything? At the same time, Daniel felt an unexpected warmth of gratitude. Laura hadn't just warned him. She had challenged his entire perception of the world. More than that, she did it without any self-interest, without wanting anything in return. She risked looking foolish simply because she saw something no one else did. A new question began to form in Daniel's mind. What else was he missing in his life? Daniel couldn't believe what he was uncovering. As he delved deeper into his investigations, the truth began to emerge like a nightmare he didn't want to face. The looks of complicity, the whispers in meetings. It all started to make sense. Some of his closest advisors, people he considered friends and allies, were involved in a conspiracy to bring him down. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any financial attack. One evening, after hours of phone calls and secret meetings, he finally confronted one of his longtime advisors, Arthur. Daniel sat at his elegant conference table, soft light illuminating his tense face. "Why, Arthur? Why would you do this to me?" The question was filled with pain and confusion, and the silence that followed was deafening. Arthur, initially stunned, tried to justify his actions. But his words, a mixture of excuses and rationalizations, fell like a heavy curtain between them. Daniel felt a knot form in his throat. It was a strange feeling, a mix of anger and sadness. The betrayal wasn't just a blow to his business. It was a violation of the trust he had placed in someone he had known for years. As Daniel grappled with this new reality, his perception of power and wealth began to shift. What had once been a symbol of security and control now felt like a burden. He realized that true wealth wasn't just in the numbers of his bank account, but in the genuine relationships he had neglected in his pursuit of success. The disloyalty forced him to reevaluate everything he thought he knew about the world he lived in. What he had built wasn't just an empire, it was a house of cards, and the foundation was crumbling. The door to the restaurant opened and Daniel walked in, the familiar aroma of fresh coffee and warm bread wrapping around him like a hug. He had spent days trying to process the shocking revelations and the pain of betrayal. Now, his mind was set. He needed to find Laura, the waitress who, without knowing it, had changed the course of his life. When he spotted her, his heart raced. She was arranging silverware at a nearby table, her usual attention to small details evident. He approached her slowly, almost nervously. "Laura," he said, his voice a little lower than he intended. "Do you have a moment?" She looked at him surprised and smiled shyly. "Of course, sir, Daniel, right?" "Yes," he confirmed, feeling a lump in his throat. "I just wanted to thank you. What you did for me was incredible. I avoided a financial trap, and it was all thanks to you." Laura shook her head, a bit puzzled. "I didn't do much. I just felt it was my duty to warn you." Her humility only deepened Daniel's admiration for her. "Honestly, I never thought you would take my warning seriously." Daniel hesitated. "But you don't understand. I almost lost everything. This wasn't just a warning, it was a rescue. I want to repay you in some way." She laughed lightly, the shyness still present in her eyes. "That's not necessary. I'm just doing my job. That's enough for me." Her response caught him off guard, but it was also a revelation. He realized that Laura wasn't seeking recognition or reward. She was simply acting according to her own integrity. That was where true wealth lay, not in possessions, but in the generosity and kindness that hid in everyday interactions. Daniel smiled, feeling grateful to have crossed paths with her, and realized that life had so much more to offer than just money and power. In the days following his encounter with Laura, Daniel felt a whirlwind of emotions unfold inside him. The experience hadn't only saved him from financial disaster, but it had also forced him to reevaluate the essence of his life. He had always believed that wealth and power were the pillars of his identity. Now, however, something was changing. Sitting in his luxurious office, surrounded by documents and charts, Daniel realized that each of those papers didn't just represent numbers, but people who depended on him, their families, their hopes. He remembered the sincerity in Laura's eyes, as if her kindness was a reminder that success wasn't only measured in millions, but in human connections and meaningful actions. Determined to act, Daniel began seeking advice not just from his usual advisors, but from people of different backgrounds and experiences. He made a point to listen to the employees in his company, to their opinions, and started including their voices in decisions. He was moving away from the image of a distant boss, someone everyone feared. Daniel wanted to be a leader who inspired trust and, above all, respect. He also started investing in social initiatives he had previously ignored. He remembered a local project supporting young entrepreneurs and decided to fund the program. He began to understand that by helping others rise, he was also lifting himself. His perspective was expanding. Life was no longer just about individual achievements, but about creating a legacy that was truly valuable. This transformation was just beginning, but Daniel felt more alive than ever. Instead of seeing the world only through numbers, he began to see the beauty in the diversity of human experiences. He had found a new purpose, a new direction in his journey, and he was determined to follow it. With the new outlook Daniel had adopted, his office transformed into a vibrant and collaborative space. He began holding open meetings where all employees, regardless of their positions, were encouraged to share ideas. Those who had previously felt invisible now had the chance to be heard. Daniel realized that the diversity of opinions not only enriched decisions, but also created a more positive and innovative environment. Additionally, he implemented stricter ethical policies within his company. Transparency became the norm. Daniel knew that trusting the people around him was essential. He started reevaluating partnerships and suppliers, choosing those who shared his new values of social responsibility and sustainability. Every decision he made was now guided not just by profit, but by the impact it would have on the communities involved. The employees began to notice this change. Team morale soared, and productivity skyrocketed. There was a sense of collective purpose that hadn't existed before. Ideas flowed freely, and innovations that had been stifled by a rigid hierarchy began to flourish. Daniel noticed that his meetings were now filled with energy and enthusiasm, and discussions had become much more constructive. The impact of his transformation wasn't only felt internally. Local communities started to benefit from the initiatives Daniel implemented. He sponsored training programs and courses for young people, connecting them to opportunities in the business world. This new approach not only strengthened the reputation of his company but also built bonds of trust and gratitude with the community. Daniel realized that true success wasn't just in accumulating wealth, but in building a legacy that could transform lives. He had become not just a businessman but a true leader, inspiring others to follow the path of conscience and ethics in business. Daniel looked out the window of his office, the city lights flickering under the night sky. It was a view he knew well, but now it seemed different, more vibrant. He had made the decision to distance himself from the toxic alliances that had once filled his circle. Those friends and partners who only cared about profit and appearances were left behind. Instead, he sought out people who shared his new values and worldview. He began attending community events and participating in initiatives that promoted inclusion and solidarity. It was at one of these occasions that he met other entrepreneurs who, like him, believed that business could be a force for good. Daniel felt revitalized, finding a network of support and collaboration that prioritized not only financial success, but also the well-being of people and the planet. Inspired by the waitress who had changed his life, he decided to create a foundation supporting young entrepreneurs from underprivileged communities. He wanted others to have the same chance to rise as he had. The foundation became a platform for untapped talent to receive mentorship, funding, and resources to realize their dreams. Over time, Daniel saw his company thrive in ways he had never imagined. Profits grew, but what truly motivated him was the positive impact his decisions were having on the lives of those around him. He felt connected, not just to his business but to a network of lives he was touching. This new journey was no longer just about success, but about meaning. And as he looked out the window, Daniel knew he had found his path. A path rooted in integrity, where real human connections were the true treasure. What would you do in Daniel's place? Would you have listened to the waitress or would you have gone to that meeting? Leave a comment below telling us what you would do, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this.